Picture this. It's 2011, Microsoft walks onto a stage and says, "We just bought Skype for $8.5 billion. $8.5 billion. At the time, Skype was the way to call someone online. Long-distance relationships survived because of it, businesses ran on it, and that ringtone? Iconic, right? This was supposed to secure Microsoft's future. Instead, it became a very expensive lesson. Here's what most people didn't see. Skype was kind of a mess behind the scenes. It wasn't built like Microsoft software. It was peer-to-peer, clunky, hard to scale. Integrating it into Windows and Xbox was like duct taping two different machines together. Updates were weird, calls lagged, and users complained. And while Microsoft was trying to fix Skype, a small internal team was building something new. Microsoft
we think
Teams.
The world of tomorrow will work.
Welcome to Microsoft Teams. Together, there's no limit to what we can achieve.
Cleaner, faster, built for business. And slowly, employees started using Teams instead of Skype. Imagine paying $8.5 billion for a house and then deciding to live in the guest house instead. By 2021, Skype was basically irrelevant. Microsoft didn't crash, they didn't implode, they just quietly replaced what they bought. And here's the real twist. They didn't buy Skype because it was perfect, they bought it because they were afraid of being left behind. And fear is expensive. Now, that's bad, but at least Microsoft survived. The next company, they almost owned the future and then watched it walk away. In 1983, the video game industry was collapsing. Arcades were dying, home consoles were collecting dust, Atari stock was crashing. Inside a conference room in California, Atari executives were staring at something that could save them. A small Japanese company called Nintendo wants to enter the US. They have a console. It's polished, stable, and different. Atari could distribute it nationwide, and if this deal closes, Atari controls the comeback of gaming. But pride is sitting at the table too. Negotiations start to move forward. Contracts are drafted, branding discussed, launch strategy mapped out. Then comes the CES trade show. An Atari executive walks the floor and freezes. Nintendo is demonstrating Donkey Kong on a competitor's system. To Atari, it looks like betrayal. He doesn't ask questions, he doesn't wait for clarification, he just simply assumes. But at the table, the tone changes. You violated exclusivity. Nintendo insists it's a misunderstanding, a licensing confusion from a previous deal, but trust is gone. The deal collapses, Nintendo boards a flight back to Japan. Atari stays in California, convinced they dodged a bad partner. 2 years later, the Nintendo Entertainment System launches in America without Atari. It doesn't just succeed, it revives the entire industry Atari once ruled. Super Mario becomes a household name. Kids line up for cartridges instead of Atari consoles, and Atari watches from the sidelines as the company they almost partnered with becomes the new king. One assumption, one ego-driven moment, and history flips. Atari saw the opportunity, they just mishandled it. But the next company, they didn't mishandle the future, they built it and still let it go. In the late 1970s, inside Xerox PARC, engineers are building something they can barely explain. A computer screen with windows, icons you can click, a tiny plastic device called a mouse. To them, it's revolutionary. To Xerox executives, it's interesting, but Xerox makes billions selling copiers. Why risk chasing something uncertain? Then Steve Jobs walks in.
I was so blinded by the first thing they showed me, which was the graphical user interface.
Jobs is given a demo. He watches the cursor move, he clicks an icon, he opens Windows, and he leans forward. You can almost see it in his face, that moment when someone realizes the world is about to change. So he asks some questions rapid fire. How much does this cost? Why aren't you shipping this? The engineers are passionate. The executives, calm, detached. They don't see a clear path to profit. To them, it's a research toy. To Jobs, it's the blueprint for the next decade. Apple launches the Macintosh in 1984, Microsoft follows with Windows. It's everywhere. Homes, schools, offices. Xerox didn't lose because they were slow, they lost because they were comfortable. They had the future in their hands and treated it like a side project. Sometimes innovation isn't rare, belief is. Now, losing technology is painful, but losing something you created, that's worse. And that's exactly what happened to the Beatles. In the early 1960s, 4 young musicians from Liverpool are desperate for a record deal. They don't have leverage, they don't have lawyers fighting over clauses, they just want to be heard. So they signed publishing agreements. Standard contracts, nothing dramatic. At the time, it feels like a breakthrough, but it's actually a ticking clock. Fast forward, they're the biggest band on earth. Stadiums shaking, global hysteria, cultural icons. But ownership of their publishing company, Northern Songs, starts shifting. Corporate investors begin buying shares. John and Paul realize something terrifying. They don't control their own catalog. They try to buy it back, negotiations drag on, bids escalate, and then they lose. Years later, in 1985, Michael Jackson purchases the catalog for $47.5 million. The songs that defined a generation now belong to someone else. Imagine turning on the radio and hearing your own voice, knowing you have no control over it. The Beatles created the art, but they didn't protect the asset. Talent made them legendary, contracts made someone else wealthy. And in business, emotion doesn't override paperwork. Now, the Beatles lost ownership because they didn't understand the long game, but one man did, and he made sure he would never lose control. This might be the most expensive contract mistake in movie history. In 1976, 20th Century Fox agreed to let a young director keep the sequel rights and merchandising rights to a strange space movie called Star Wars. At the time, it looked harmless. Today, that decision cost them billions. Here's what actually happened. George Lucas was negotiating with Fox to finance Star Wars. At the time, studios made money in one main way: the box office. Opening weekend, ticket sales, theater revenue. That's what mattered. Merchandising, toys, licensing? In the 1970s, that wasn't serious money. It was an afterthought. So when Lucas made a very unusual request during negotiations, the studio didn't see the risk. He said, "I'll lower my directing fee if I can keep sequel rights and full control of merchandising." To Fox, that sounded like a cheap trade. To Lucas, it was everything. Now, understand the mindset. Fox believed they were financing one movie, one gamble. Sci-fi was unpredictable. The budget was high, special effects were experimental. They were worried about losing money on the film itself. Lucas was thinking differently. He wasn't building a one-time story. He was building a universe that could expand. Sequels, spin-offs, characters kids could obsess over. When Star Wars premiered in 1977, it didn't just perform well, it exploded. Theaters were overwhelmed, and then something unexpected happened. Kids didn't just want to see the movie, they wanted to own it. Lightsabers, action figures, posters, lunchboxes. Merchandising revenue skyrocketed. Within a year, toy sales alone crossed $100 million. And Fox didn't control that. Lucas did. Every sequel that followed, Lucas controlled it. Every licensing deal, Lucas controlled. Every expansion of the universe, Fox had to negotiate back into something they once gave away for free. The mistake wasn't that Fox financed a risky movie. The mistake was that they undervalued intellectual property. They thought they were selling plastic toys. They were giving away long-term control. Now, Fox made money from Star Wars, but George Lucas made generational wealth. When Disney eventually bought Lucasfilms in 2012, they paid over $4 billion. Not for one movie, for the universe. Here's the business lesson. Fox optimized for short-term risk. Lucas optimized for long-term ownership. The studio saw a product. Lucas saw a platform. And in business, the platform is almost always worth more than the first sale. The biggest mistake wasn't financing Star Wars, it was misunderstanding what Star Wars could become. Sometimes the most expensive part of a deal is the part that doesn't look valuable yet. And hey, I'll catch you next time.